Oh, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first Canada STEMathon Girls and Allies 2024, sponsored by Enbridge Gas, Magna, Rockwell Automation. I'm your co-host, Tart the Canada's of Apathy, and I am thrilled to be here all weekend long for what is going to be a fabulous event. But before we get started, folks, as Canadians, it is important to recognize the land of which we are a part. As we gather for this meeting, physically dispersed and virtually constructed, let us take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place, and in doing so, recognize the various traditional lands on which we celebrate today. We acknowledge the elders and youth, past, present, and emerging, of all the land on which we work and live. We honor the ancestral spirits with gratitude and respect. We acknowledge this land out of respect for the Indigenous nations who have cared for Turtle Island, also called North America. The Indigenous people have been gifted the role of caretakers of this land before the arrival of settler peoples until today. But most importantly, we must remember the history of these lands and people that have been tainted by poor treatment and a lack of friendship with the First Nations who called Canada home back before it was given this name. This history is something that we are all affected by. We are all treaty people in Canada, and we all have a shared history to reflect on. And each of us is affected by this history in different ways. Our past does define our present, but if we move forward as friends and allies, it does not define our future. All right, folks, I'd like to welcome a veteran to this event, my co-host, First Canada alum, MC, and longtime STEMathon volunteer, Emily Forster. What up,
Hey,
Emily?
Hey, Karthik.
It is great to see you. How excited are you for this event?
I'm so excited. I have been waiting for this event for weeks and weeks. I'm just so excited to see it happening.
It's going to be a good time. So, Emily, how did you get here? Who are you? What are you doing here? What's going on?
So, my name's Emily Forster. I just finished my third year in mechanical engineering at Mechanical Engineering and Society at McMaster University. I'm also alum of FRC Team 2056 and an alum of the First Canada Youth Council, and I'm also on the planning committee of this amazing event.
And there's a lot going on with this event. So for folks, for you, if you were like brand new to this all and you're like, what is a STEMathon? Well, folks, a STEMathon is like a hackathon, but it's not a hackathon. It's a STEMathon in that, hackathons are a little bit more coding focused, and this one's a bit more focused on, your solution can be in any sort of way. But the students here are going to problem solve and create an innovative solution through the application of STEM related to our theme. And our theme this year is
Find out later.
all right, we'll find out later. We're not going to say it just yet. Just yet, we are going to tell you. But the theme is cool. I am so excited for this theme. It's all over the place. A little bit of a hint. It's been in the news lately, so maybe you want to start guessing in the Twitch chat. Kind of throw your guesses out there, see what's there, and maybe we'll say some of them on air. See if anyone gets it right. We're not going to tell you if you get it right, at least not until a little bit later on in the show.
For sure, yeah.
But after
And
you're given the theme, sorry, Emily, but after they're given the theme, you will have to come up with a solution, and then present it to the judges. That's right. You're gonna have to pitch to a panel of judges who are absolutely fantastic. We got some great industry experts here, along with making an infographic for the judges to take a look to kind of understand your project, and then we'll be awarding prizes. But Emily, what else is before we get working? What else is happening this morning?
yeah, we're gonna have a few more presentations this morning, some on design and presenting skills from some First Canada alum, Lisa Rumraj and Celeste Santel.
Yeah,
And we're
and that's
also
gonna.
gonna have
Oh,
oh
sorry. I'm
sorry.
sorry. We're just so excited, Emily.
We can't hold it in. And then on Sunday, after some of your interviews with the judges and such, we're gonna have some scavenger hunts and then some also these amazing STEM-themed escape rooms that the youth council put together. They're so cool. You're gonna love them.
I love a good escape room. In fact, I'm a little bit bummed that I can't play in the escape room because I kind of want to sign up. I feel like Emily, me and you, we could just like kick everyone's butt.
We've been in an escape room before, and I think we won.
I'm pretty sure we did. I'm pretty sure we
Yeah,
did. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's how it works usually, right? I
we're
forgot about
just
that. That's right. Our team.
yeah.
That was me, you, and Swaggy P, right?
I think so. Yeah, it was a
Yeah.
good team.
Yeah, it was like there was a lot of coding based stuff, and like the three of
Yeah,
us were just. Did we have Victoria with us as well? I
we
think.
did.
I think
It was us, Victoria.
we
Yeah,
were
it
so
was.
stacked.
It was too easy, but yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That was a good time. Hey, speaking of Swaggy P, the legend himself, we have some First Canada swag as some of our prizes for the various games, the escape rooms, the Gracious Professionalism Award, but we also have some big prizes, right, Emily?
Yeah, we're gonna have some really big tech prizes. Yeah, tech prizes. There'll be Skull Candy Rift wireless on-ear headphones for the Spirit Award, Fujifilm Instant Mini 11s for the Best Pitch Award, Fitbit Charge 5s for the Best Project, and HP X360 Chromebooks for the Best Overall. And that means each member of those teams that win that award, They each get Chromebooks.
So you win. You get like a new laptop that you can use in university, your rest of high school. It could be your programming laptop. Actually, don't use a Chromebook for your programming laptop. That's probably not the best idea. But still,
Yeah.
that's a pretty cool prize. So there's a lot on the line here. So we're excited to see what you come up with your projects. But folks, there's a bigger picture of this event. The goal of this event is to provide an engaging, interactive online opportunity for young women in STEM and their allies to problem solve, collaborate on teams, and open minds to new opportunities. And folks, it's not just about, STEM. This is a first event, and the core to the ethos of first are, gracious professionalism, empathy, and, thinking of others and trying to make the world a better place. And that's going to really be important as you get to your solutions. But one of the most unique things about First, and we brought it into the STEMathon, is the presence of experienced mentors. We have 27 of the most impressive First alums and volunteers here at this event who are going to be available all weekend to support, encourage, and advise teams as you work on your solution. So, without any further ado, let's meet our mentors. Da, 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 da.
Drum roll, please.
All right. Starting off with Amanda Lojudice and Angela Tolis.
Then we have a new Priya Dubé and myself, Emily Forster.
Erica Rossi and Gabby Gennaro.
Then we have Reedy Paul and Jamie Warham.
Jaskeen Sagatra and Jenna K. Furch.
Then we have Julia McFarlane and Karthik Kanagasabi.
Lisa Ramraj and Logan Webb.
Then we have Marie Rebury and Megan McEwen.
Mahak Dhaliwal and Michelle Petra.
We have Namir Kadir and Nikita Jotsinghagani.
Rajoshree Paul and Ramisha Kazi.
And then we have Rishi Jotsinghani and Sarah Heimlich.
Shahed Saleh and Shabika Mahakul.
And then we have Victoria Angelini.
What a great group of mentors, folks. We have, folks worked for NASA, worked for MD Robotics. We got it's just a wide array of people with AI experience, people with experience in healthcare, all sorts of different fields. We got mathematicians, we got software people, engineers. It's really, really exciting. So this is your opportunity to work with these folks and learn from these folks, and also to network with these folks, because maybe they're hiring summer interns. You never know. This is like the greatest opportunity. Like, you talk to so many of our mentors, and one of the things that has come up, they keep talking about how many of the jobs that they've gotten have been because of their first experience. So this is another place to showcase all of that. And speaking of industry experts, Emily, we have some fantastic judges. So I think it's time to meet the judges. Our judges include Adit Patel, founder and CEO of Blockscope; Gilbert Lai, R&D manager, systems and industrial group at Quanzer;
Lahari Pakalapati, advanced data scientist at RBC; and Libby Kamen, broadcast media coordinator for the PWHL.
Parisa Asgarzadeh, senior deep learning scientist, Metaspectral; and Thuvashan Rajagulasingam, senior account executive from Vivi.io. Okay, I just got to say, Emily, the coolest thing. I mean, all the judges are cool, but we have someone who works for the PWHL, the Professional Women's Hockey League. So last night, she was literally like working the broadcast of was it game 3 last night? I think it was Boston and Montreal. Game 3 or game 2? Yeah, lose track or whatever. So like, normally Libby mentors at this event, but because she's so busy with the PWHL, she can't commit to the mentoring, but was able to commit to judging on Sunday morning. So that's going to be fantastic.
Yeah.
Hey, folks, throughout the show, if you have any questions for us, post them in the Twitch chat. We'll be happy to talk about them on air. Ooh, we got one guest for the theme so far, Emily. Someone has guessed World Hunger. That'd be an interesting one. That'd be a very interesting one.
It would.
But you have any other questions for us? Any other comments? Drop them in chat. We will chat. We'll talk about everything that's going on. But right now, folks, we're going to be back in just a moment after a word from one of our sponsors, Enbridge.
Manufacturing is the cornerstone of our economy. However, it is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. There are a multitude of solutions, including energy efficiency, low carbon technologies such as renewable natural gas, geothermal, and hydrogen, and they all play a part in the transition towards a clean energy future.
A specific example of how Enbridge is leading the energy transition is leveraging our storage assets where we've been safely storing natural gas for 75 years, and to now look at those same assets to store new things such as hydrogen.
There are areas that you just can't electrify efficiently. So for instance, the making of steel, where they use gas or coal as part of the process itself. You have to use something that's to replace those elements, and hydrogen fits the bill.
It's just beginning. We're starting to scale up pilot projects and demonstration projects to utility scale size and implement real change.
All right, thank you so much, Enbridge. Now, folks, to open today's show, please welcome via video, Chair of the First Robotics Canada Board of Directors, Dorothy Byers.
Good morning, STEMathon participants. I'm Dorothy Byers, Chair of our First Canada Board of Directors, and it's a real pleasure to be with you here this morning to welcome you to this great event. Congratulations on stepping up for the challenges that you will face today. Remember that you are working in an incredible environment with support from a wonderful group of mentors. Learn everything you can from them. You will often hear us speak of girls and allies who are confronting the challenges of equity, diversity, and inclusion in STEM fields. Diversity of thought and experience are the best ways to solve challenges. So listen carefully to each other and build on the thinking that is given voice as you work together. Have fun and learn as much as you possibly can. You will be using your creativity, problem-solving, critical thinking, artistic, oral, and teamwork skills as you work to solve this year's challenge, which will be revealed a little bit later. Revel in the challenge of solving the issue. You can change the world, and we're counting on it. And of course, as the TV icon of children's programming from my generation, Mr. Rogers, said, always look for the helpers. And you have many helpers here. A shout out to the youth alumni members and the first staff who are here with you today. They are an amazing group of people who want you to excel and be the best that you possibly can be. Use their expertise and learn as much as you can from them and each other. So best wishes for a great event today. Be proud of what you accomplish. And I hope to see you again very soon at another great first event. Have fun. Have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. What a great way to kick off the day. Now, folks, I'd like to introduce our first presentation. Emily, are you ready for our first presentation?
I am so excited.
This is going to be a good one. Please welcome First Canada alum, mechanical engineering graduate from the University of Waterloo, and First Canada First Tech Challenge program manager, Lisa Ramraj, who has also been a part of the STEMathon since day one, right, Lisa?
Yes, yes. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to, I think someone said this is the 5th STEMathon.
This is the 5th one. Isn't that wild to believe? Like,
Yeah.
you know how long ago the first one was? Neither of us were working at First Canada at that point.
Wow.
Right? We were just volunteers, at that time, just like plugging along, enjoying the event or whatever. And I think, honestly, STEMathon was I know it's part of what inspired, like we realized, oh wait, this is something I want to be more a part of, right?
Yeah.
It's
Definitely.
fantastic event. So Lisa, what are you what are you talking about today? What are you telling us about?
So I'm going to go over some brainstorming and design tips because just like robotic season, when we get the new game, everyone is just amazed and we want to go through everything and you have big ideas, but like maybe not even knowing where to start because everyone's just talking about a million different things, which is exactly what we want when you guys hear the theme. I think everyone's going to be super excited. But just like robotic season, you have a time limit here. So I kind of want to give an outline of just brainstorming and design tips that you can try to follow a little bit to give yourself some time to do everything and really get come up with a final project for this. And these design tips can be applied in any project, really. It's really like a way to organize your thoughts, a way to look at a process.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the important things about the STEMathon, because I think it's easy to get focused so much on your project here, but this is all about problem solving. And at the end of the day, you might be not trying to solve a sort of problem like we're going to be giving you today, but you're always solving problems, whether it be to figure out how to cut the tiles to make sure that they fit properly in your new kitchen, or whether it be how to get your bike chain unjammed or whatever. It's all problem solving, and problem solving doesn't properly happen without a process. Sometimes that process happens really quickly because it's a rush or whatever, but the process is what's so important. So if you learn the process, you can solve any problem, right, Lisa?
Yep, pretty much.
All right, so let's take it away.
We'll get started. So we'll go to the next slide. All right, a little bit of an introduction for me. I think Karthik pretty much covered all of it. But my name is Lisa Ramage. I studied mechanical engineering at the University of Waterloo. I have 13 years of first robotics competition experience as a student, alumni, and mentor of Team 1310 Runnymede Robotics. I was the former lead mentor for that team. I am currently the First Tech Challenge program manager for First Robotics Canada. My favorite animal is a polar bear. Second probably is ducks. You might be able to see like there's a bunch of little ducks in my background here. There were a million more, but had to clear some out. And my favorite color is red, which you can also probably tell. So we'll go to the next slide. All right. So let's look at the engineering design process as a whole. And everything is color coded because I love colors. So you'll see that theme go through. So it's kind of easy to follow. So step 1 is define the problem. Step 2 is do your research, because we have so many avenues available to us in terms of like finding out knowledge. So it's really cool to do some research, find out what's more about this problem and possible solutions. And then the next step is what are your requirements and criteria? And we'll kind of go through the differences between those two. Next
Lisa,
step
can I
is,
interrupt for 1 second?
yeah.
Because Emily and I are laughing because there was a fly buzzing around Emily's head. And I just wanted everyone to understand why we're giggling like this.
Oh my
You didn't have to bring attention to it.
You started laughing, then I started laughing, and then Lisa was looking at us like, why are they laughing? So I was like, I better say
That is
something,
true.
Like this is a live broadcast, folks. The fly is excited about the STEMathon too. It's okay.
Just wants
Lisa,
to learn
Emily?
about the engineering design process so it can learn how to like get people's
Exactly.
attention
Okay.
and get its food, right?
Emily and I will behave now. I
Okay.
promise. Well,
So the next
she'll
step
behave. I
is
don't know about me.
so the next step is the step that is always the most fun. So brainstorming. The sky is the limit with whatever you want to brainstorm. Then we go into proof of concept versus prototype, and we'll also go through the differences of those two. And then evaluate, because you need to evaluate whether the solution you come up with actually does solve your problem. And then those 3 steps, based on brainstorming, proof of concept, and evaluating, and based on the results, you will kind of go through those processes again, because this is iterative. At some point, you will have to stop, but for the most part, we're always learning. When you're building your robots, you always want to iterate, make it better. So lots of you have experience with that. And then eventually you get to your final solution. So we're going to go look at each of these steps individually now. So next slide. So, like I said, step 1 is define the problem. Major question, what is the problem? And when you're trying to define that, try to hone in on the root cause of the problem and not a symptom. Some of the strategic questions you can ask are, where are you trying to get to? And what is stopping you from getting there? Some analytical questions are, where does this problem come from? And why are things the way they are? And some implicative questions can be, what groups of people are affected by this problem? And what impact could addressing this one problem have on other areas? The more specific the definition of your problem is, the easier brainstorming will be because you will be focusing on that specific definition. You will be focusing your brainstorming on answering that question. Next slide. So next step would be research. Look at examples. There are a million examples available at our fingertips every single day. Look at how different industries have addressed a similar issue to what you're trying to solve. Some robot examples are different styles of shooters and different types of intakes. When it comes to shooters, there are tons of examples online. And First Robotics competition and First Tech Challenge, we have shot all different types of balls of different sizes and textures. We've even shot frisbees and cubes and now we've like done cones and things. And the same goes for intakes. There are over the bumper intakes, under the bumper intakes, within bumper, single game piece versus multi-game piece intakes. So the first step would be when designing a robot, well, one of my first steps would be when I'm looking at the game piece, it's like, what game is similar to this? And let's look at different robots for that played that game that had really great intakes or shooters.
And at least that's like a real life thing too. You know, when you're looking at a problem, it's like, okay, like how has this problem been solved elsewhere? And
Exactly.
I'll even say this, like, as a mathematician, but like in math class, you're given a problem. It's like, okay, what other problems are analogous to this? So I can kind of think back, oh, wait, last semester we solved something like this. So I can use that same sort of approach.
Yeah, exactly. And some online learning examples, which I know all of you are very well versed in. It's like, how do universities do online courses, or how do companies that have offices all around the world host meetings or events for their employees around the world? And one answer is Zoom, like we're doing right now. But another really cool example that I don't know if a lot of people have had experience with is something called GatherTown, which is really fun. GatherTown is essentially a virtual platform that combines video calling and like a 2D world. So what happens is everyone gets to make their own avatar. And like as you walk through this world, when you walk through within proximity to someone, you can actually start a chat with them or like start a huddle with a bunch of different people. When it comes to doing presentations, you can create the owner of the space can create a stage, and everyone can go sit in the audience in their avatars and like move and sit beside different people and start conversations, or talk to the person beside them. And it's a really cool bridge between like being super online and dispersed, but like getting that kind of social aspect to it, which is a really creative solution. You can even like make classrooms or like little meeting rooms where you can go in, and it's like once you enter the space, you can see all the 7 people that are in the room and like share documents and things. So it's a really creative way to like bridge the gap of like, how do we do this dispersed but keep this community feel. So if you have some time, look up GatherTown if you're ever thinking of doing something like that. It's really fun. So
It's a lot of fun.
it's so much fun, especially remember creating your space is a lot of fun, and making, making trees appear and all that. So I guess what I'm saying is that the main point is that people have tried, there's so many different solutions to a problem. There's no one right solution, and there's so many examples that exist. So when you're starting off, do some research to see what's out there, because you never know, you might be inspired. All right, next slide. Once you've done some of this research, kind of have an idea of a little bit more about your problem, like where it comes from, the details about it, and kind of like what solutions are out there already, it's time to kind of hone in on your requirements and criteria for your solution. So requirements are things that the design must do or it fails. And criteria are scalable values that are used to compare ideas. So that can be cost, manufacturability, accessibility, required training, and so many millions of other things. But those are some basics. Some examples here are a requirement could be that a robot needs to shoot 3 balls in 3 seconds. That's like requirement, it has to do that. And then the criteria could be ball scoring rate, where faster is better. Next slide. And now we're at the fun part. It's time for brainstorming. And of course, brainstorming could typically happens like you start thinking about it right when you get like the new game or the new theme. As soon as you see it, I'm so sure your minds are going to start racing. But during the brainstorming process, you really want to focus on the requirements and criteria, but you want to hear everyone out. You don't want to leave anything out and keep all the ideas on the table. Because you never know, if someone might say something early on in your conversation that solves some part of the problem, but maybe not all of it. And then later on, as the conversation progresses, someone might say another idea that solves a different part. And if you put the two together, then you have a full-blown solution. So you always want to keep an open mind, essentially throw everything at the wall. And then you're going to want to kind of look at it and see which ideas do you want to explore a little bit further. Next slide. The next step with those ideas that you want to explore is either making a proof of concept or a prototype. And sometimes these words are used interchangeable, so I kind of want to define them. A proof of concept is a small scale. It's used to show the product or feature can be developed. Like, this is the thing that we can do to help solve this problem. It's used to verify functionality, and you essentially can use whatever you have on hand. A prototype, however, is a to-scale model with the ability to adjust features, ideally. It has almost all the functionality of the final product, and it's used to test against your variables. You typically would use materials that are close as possible to the ones that you intend to use in the final product. Few notes are that for a proof of concept, you want to use anything, like I said, anything you have on hand. So for a software solution, you might use a notebook where you can do small blocks of code where you can quickly get an output to test any input theories. And for physical items, really just use whatever you have. Like 3D printing is super popular now. I'm a cardboard and crafts type of person, so I'll make anything out of just the crafting materials that I have. I'm just like, my brain works that way. I can figure out how to make it through that. But honestly, anything that works for you. You can start CADing, make like simple drawings through that. My one tip would be cautious of overly prototyping and only fully prototype like the things that you actually need. So for example, if you want to figure out which types of wheels would be best to grip for your intake to grip onto a game piece, you wouldn't build a fully functioning, completely wired and powered intake. You essentially, what you would do is like put the wheels, create a, I'm losing the word. Create a setup where you can easily change out the different test bench. Thank you. Oh, that's the word. Create a test bench where you can set up like pieces of plywood with a way to change the wheels in and out, and you can just power the wheels. So then it's the fastest thing because you don't actually need to build up your whole idea to test that one component. All right, next slide. This is one of my favorite go-to examples for a software example of a kind of proof of concept. So on the left, we have our proof of concept idea. So I know it just looks like a bunch of lines right now, but essentially we wanted to see if it was possible to use data points that we collected during scouting to see how a team liked to drive in a match. And then on top of that, we wanted to see if it would give us any useful information, because it's kind of cool to make the maps, but if it wasn't useful, it's like, it's just a kind of cool thing to make. So the thicker the line, the more often that path was traveled. And so on the left side, you can see 1310, and you could, because of the thick line, you can tell that they preferred the sides of the cargo ship, but didn't really have too much of a preference other like in terms of specific place, because they kind of went all over. But then on the other hand, 5406, you could tell that they really liked to do the rocket more than the cargo ship, and they preferred the right side of the field because those lines were thicker than the other ones. So now we knew, one, we could make a visual of all of this that was decent enough to read, and it could actually tell us some interesting things about the robots. On the right-hand side, that's an example of a prototype shooter. And you can't easily see this, but on the shooter, there are 3 different gear ratio sets. So we could take the shafts out and like we had space to put different sets of gears so that we could adjust. We could see which set actually worked the best to meet our requirements because we wanted to be able to do a really close-up shot and a far shot. And the sides of it were cut out of hardboard rather than plexi because one, it was so much faster on the CNC just so that we could get it going. But two, we didn't want to waste the expensive material when the hardboard could hold up to the basic test. Like maybe it would last like 2 days, which is really all that we needed it to last to be able to pick what the gear ratio was finally going to be.
Hey, Lisa, we got a question in chat.
Oh,
What
okay.
software did you use to create that proof of concept?
That's a wonderful question. If anyone wants to message Rishi Jotsangani in the Slack channel, he can
Rishi's
answer
in the
that.
Twitch chat. Rishi's in the Twitch
Oh,
chat.
perfect. He can
He's
answer that
he's
question.
talking about Jack, actually. So
Okay, so
yeah.
Rishi was actually the one to make it. I just wanted to highlight this really awesome thing. I would actually like to know the answer to that question myself.
Yeah, Rishi, come on, give us an answer here. What are we doing? Speed up.
All right, we'll come back to that. Next slide. And here's a fun example of how to go from proof of concept all the way to like your final prototype. So essentially, we wanted to make an intake that could pick up off the ground and pick up off the feeder station, which was essentially just a full wall that you ran into. So where we started was, you can see the clamps in this photo where the pieces of 2x4 literally just clamped to something that could hold it together, and 2 pieces of hex shafts that we could pretty much just adjust to their location. And then from there, when we kind of figured out, okay, this is how it would move, like these are where the pivot points need to be to actually make it articulate, then the students went into CAD, they CAD'd it up, and then the hardest part about this was to figure out where the motors had to be to make it actually do this articulation. And then once it was all CAD'd up, they made it and they made the final prototype. And while we were testing it, we realized we needed an actual 3rd bar to stop the balls from like actually coming out of that top. So it's like we started with like the super basics, CAD'd it, went to the prototype, which was like very close to the final solution. All we were going to do was add 1 more shaft, and then it was going to be the final solution. Yeah, the final product was beautiful. I know in this picture it was like blue and blue wheels and everything, but the final product was red and black, very colored on theme to 1310, very well branded, beautiful. All right, those are enough examples for now. So we're going to go to the next slide, which is evaluate. So now you have all these cool, at this point, you might have a bunch of different proof of concepts or prototypes, and you kind of want to see, okay, which one actually solves, which one is actually the best at executing the problem. So step 1, make sure that you are, when you're doing evaluations, you want to do apples to apples. So you want to evaluate proof of concepts to proof of concepts and prototypes versus prototypes. You don't necessarily want to try to compare a proof of concept to a prototype because like they don't have the same functionality. So like you might be swayed one way when it doesn't actually represent, it's not like a true representation. So how do you do this evaluation? So essentially you take your criteria, you list them out, and then you assign weights to the different criteria. And the easy way to do this is make it add up to 100. And the one that is the most important to you will have the highest weight, and the one that's least important, but still important, like you still want it to be there because it's on this list of criteria, will have the least. So when you've gone through your requirements and criteria, you might have like 100 different things like well, hopefully you part it down, but the main ones you put on here. So here I have cost, accessibility, manufacturability, and required training. And we'll go to the next slide. And so while those are the 4 things I have in that, I wanted to draw everyone's attention to other types of criteria that you might also want to include in your design matrix. For example, carbon footprint. If you want to consider the carbon emissions that are associated with each design throughout the whole life cycle, that's a great thing to put on there. Sustainability. You can put like the renewable, recyclable, and low impact materials. If that's that's something that you want to fully consider. You can consider the sustainability of the entire supply chain. And another factor of that could be, does this product encourage users to adopt sustainable behaviors? Another one is social and environmental justice. Consider the ethical sourcing of the raw materials and fair labor practices during manufacturing. Does this solution benefit marginalized communities? Does it harm populations or ecosystems? So these are 3 other examples that you could add to your design matrix. And everyone, you'll have this presentation, so you can always refer to it later.
And other examples, because this is so important, because I think so often that we focus on like productivity and like how much money is this going to make and how many units can we make or whatever. But like if we think of like oil, just the classic example, for as we use oil or whatever, you can make money if it's a product, like if it's a plastic product, there's always so much oil that goes into it or whatever. But then we need to be thinking about, well, what's the cost of the waste that is going to be created? Because no matter what, our products are going to go in the garbage at some point. And what does that matter? What about all the fossil fuels that are consumed? The carbon piecing, like this is things that, like organizations now have started to do with carbon pricing and that sort of concept. But like, here's a wild one. Bitcoin. So Bitcoin uses a ridiculous amount of electricity. And it's something like now, like the amount of electricity that's consumed by Bitcoin is equivalent to like the amount of electricity that Sweden uses in a year. And so it's like, you would think that this is like, oh, well, this is great. It makes money changes easy or whatever, even though it doesn't really, but that's another rant. But like there's negative effects of that. You look at something like AI, for example, and like ChatGPT, it uses intense amounts of water. Did you know that?
I did not know that it uses to
water
cool down the
to cool the servers. Yeah. And so these are the things, but that's a price in there because that's costing the community and whatever. And sure, they're paying for the water or whatever, but there's impacts. But like electricity usage and water usage are things that you should be thinking about. And so if just a tip when you're working on your projects for the judges, it's like maybe it would be cool to tell the judges about the environmental impacts of your solution and what you're doing to mitigate those environmental impacts, or the social justice impacts, or the sustainability impacts, all the things that Lisa's talked about here. I think this is so crucial. And like you and I always come back to this one because we're trying to leave the world in a better place than we found it, right? And that matters.
And the other thing is, one of the reasons we wanted to highlight these options to put in your design matrix is that often we'll see that it won't be front and center as part of the design. It'll be kind of like an afterthought to be like, oh, right, like we can say X, Y, Z about this. But to build a better world, this needs to be front and center, and it needs to be right there when you're making the decision. So to be kept in mind and not just as an afterthought. Next slide. I went too far ahead for myself. So now it's the evaluations tab. So this step is full of a lot of numbers. So the first thing we're going to do, we're just going to look at the first row. So in that first row, you'll see that essentially, in the first column, it lists all of the criteria, and it has the criteria and it has the weight as well in there that we assigned in the previous slide. And then across the top, we have all the different ideas listed out. So now we're going to look at just the first row. So the first row is cost. And what I'm going to be doing here is giving it a rating from 1 to 5. And the lowest cost is going to be 5 because that's my best result, right? Because I wanted to have the lowest cost. And I also list the weight there. So what'll happen is I will multiply the score that I gave out of 1 to 5 for that idea by the weight, and that'll give me a number. And then at the bottom, of, in that bottom row, after I've done that for all of the ideas and all of the criterias, I'll have the sum at the bottom, and the one with the highest number is in theory my quote unquote best idea that meets as many of my criteria in the best way possible. It's a lot of math, so everyone can look at that after. Next slide. Okay, yay. So now you've refined your idea. So now it's time to actually like go to your final product. You can build it now. So in the real world, there is a final evaluation step before a product is being mass produced. So what you'd want to do is like you'd make your final product, you'd evaluate it again based on your criteria, and see what happens. So if you run into an issue that you didn't predict, like maybe it doesn't actually, maybe when everything is together in the final phase of it, it doesn't perform the way you expected. What do? You go back to brainstorming, you'll do your proof of concept prototype again, make changes, and continue this cycle. It's meant to be iterative. It's meant to, let's just not settle for like what we have. We want to continue to make things better, right? There's always a way to make something better in any of those different ways that we mentioned before. At some point, usually dictated by time or money, you will have to stop at whatever level and stage you're at. So with robots, it's whatever it's before your competition. And hopefully before that, because you always have to do driver practice with the machine that you built. That's my shameless plug of like what I want to say there. But remember, you'll have to stop at some point. Next slide. But yeah, like I was saying, once you have that product, you're just going to keep evaluating. When you have it, keep learning, making it better. Do the test in the real environment. Do a case study on it with the demographic or the situation that you wanted it to solve. Did it actually solve the problem? What does it do well? What could it do better? And keep iterating. Next slide. So, key takeaways. So something I want everyone to remember is that your target demographic can be diverse in so many different ways, including age, life cycle stage, so whether they're a teenager versus in their career, student, gender, economic background, religion, nationality. Those are all things that can make like the target, the situation or the users of your product different. So that's why you really want to test in real world situations, kind of keep that in mind. Research existing solutions is a big one. I kept mentioning that. So look up products and processes that exist in the field. What do they do well? What could they do better? Do other industries or corporations deal with the same problem? How do you address it? Because something that we do in robots that we want to elevate everyone. So we want to work together to make a better thing, because when we crowdsource information, we're going to get different people's perspectives from different industries, different life cycle stages, that they perceive the world differently. So we can make something great. Next slide. Always revisit your requirements and constraints when making a design change. Evaluate, are you still meeting your requirements? Just maybe the change you want to do is like, oh, if this was just XYZ more of something, but maybe changing it solves the problem that you're seeing in that moment, but maybe it deviates completely from something that you had in your requirements that you just forgot that is related. Think about, is the change worth modifying your requirements for? That's also a thing. Maybe you didn't think about a concept before, and it's okay. Just make sure that you evaluate the whole situation. And does the design still reasonably fall within your criteria if you do make that change? And the next one, prototype, or make your proof of concepts, as many proof of concepts as you can, because it really does help. Conceptually, things may not work out when you do them physically. Like in our minds, we can make so many different things work, but when you see it interacting in front of you, even just like bringing it from just your imagination to in front of you, it makes a huge difference. How many of you have tried to design something in CAD and then maybe either 3D printed it or cut the pieces, and then all of a sudden they don't go together in the real world like you think they were going to? So Always prototype. Do not skip that step. We love that step. It's also the most fun. And you can evaluate it on how it actually holds up to everything. So I think those are my key takeaways. The next slide is a reference to some of the information that I had in here, but that's the presentation.
All right, thank you, Lisa. That was fabulous. And I just think it's the process, right? It's about figuring these things out. And it can be applied in a lot of different ways. And I think a lot of the examples you showed from First Robotics, but like this is the same process you all should be using on your, like independent studies that you're doing at school. And when you get to university, your design projects and anything like that. But even like the simple stuff, like I'm doing home redecoration, like Lisa, I know you do a lot of these or whatever, but like, you made like Lisa made this giant treehouse for her stuffed animals, but like it was the same sort of process to figure out like what you're trying to do, right?
Yeah, I was going to use the Barbie box as an example.
Okay,
So
go please.
I built a Barbie box, like a life-size Barbie box, for an event. And the first thing was like, well, the first define my problem. I wanted a Barbie box for myself, that could fit like my really tall friends in it and look really awesome. I did research to see what is out there, like how are people building these, because I knew I wanted it to fold to be transportable in my car. And then looked at requirements, criterias, the height, the width, all based on like wanting it to fit in the car, things like that. Brainstormed how to actually get it done. I kind of skipped the proof of concept prototype stage, but in a sense, as I started building, I ran into a lot of problems building a box. I can build robots, but for some reason, building a box really took everything out of me. I don't know what it was, but I kept hitting hurdle after hurdle, having to pivot, having to go back and do other things, but I made it. So there was a lot of like going back, doing more research, adjusting my requirements, criteria, brainstorming solutions, so much brainstorming for solutions. But in the end, we had a really awesome Barbie box that has now been to a bunch of different events, which I love. And it fits in the car. It fits perfectly, but in only my car and with
Well,
only me driving because I have to pull the seat up really,
but that was one of your
really
design
close.
constraints. It wasn't designed to fit in other cars, it was like it has
Yep,
to
just
fit in
mine.
your car.
Just mine.
Exactly.
Just
It
my
works
car.
out perfectly. All right, Lisa, thank you so much for being here. And folks, Lisa is one of the roving mentors for the STEMathon, so she'll be available all week in Slack. So if you have questions for her, just tag her into a channel and she'll be there. And Lisa, you're going to be helping with the judging process tomorrow as well. So
Yep.
you will be seeing her during your judges interview. So get ready for that. Thank you again, Lisa. And folks, we're going to be back with our next presentation. But first, a word from one of our sponsors, Magna. All right. Okay, that was a great presentation. And now we've got another one. So you've learned how to like brainstorm, you're going to come up with a solution, but you got to pitch to the judges, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And the pitching can be extremely important because you're essentially an idea that you came up with after all nights for coming up with this idea. You have to find the best way to explain it to the judges so they'll understand as well.
Well, and this is one of the things that kind of gets lost sometimes because we think of like tech skills as like hard skills, but like any idea you have is only as good as your ability to communicate it. And so you could have the most brilliant invention, but unless you can communicate that, no one's going to ever adapt it or understand it. So you have to be able to communicate it. And so what we're going to be talking about today is how to give a pitch. And so this presentation is from a First Canada alum of Team 1360, Ontario 2017 Dean's List finalist, mechanical engineer, co-founder of Acrylic Robotics, and an X36 2021 founder, Celeste Nantel. And I have to say, this presentation, seen it many times before, is the best presentation I've
I think I may
seen.
have lost you, Karthik, because I can't hear you.
Really? Uh, hey, chat, can you hear me? Chat, can you hear
Oh, maybe
Karthik?
it's just
Okay.
me.
And maybe it's just you right now, Sarah. but I mean, not Sarah, Emily. Well, hopefully Emily will get the audio back in a second, but I'll just talk to the audience right here. And this presentation is great. And so, folks, it is not just great for the STEMathon, but for any presentation you're giving, or for a job interview, for the Impact Award, maybe a Dean's List interview. This presentation is critical. So, without further ado, let's take a look at what Celeste Nantel had to say to us about how to give the perfect pitch.
Hi everyone.
Hello, Celeste. How are you
Hello.
doing on this Saturday morning?
Oh, good. I got awoken by Karthik asking me where I was, so the best way to wake up.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like an in-person event. Exactly. Where's my game
exactly. Yeah.
announcer? Like we're starting match number 1 right now. So
Yeah. Or like, we're at 7:30 meeting, and it's like, oh right. Yeah. Oh, but it's got me reminded of the good old days of getting up really early for competitions.
yeah, well, there's a lot of good things about these virtual events. Well, obviously we missed our in-person one, but the nice thing about like just having to get up 2 minutes before the event starts, that's a nice little bonus right there. Celeste, you were going to talk to us about a very important part of this year's competition. It's about how to give a pitch. So all of our teams, Mac, do you want to explain the pitch process with the judging?
Yeah, you're going to be spending a total of 8 minutes in your judging room. So there's a 5-minute pitch that you'll be doing with all of your team members, and also a 3-minute question session where the judges will ask them questions. But this pitch is really important because it plays quite a big part in your rubric itself and in the marking process. So I'm really excited to hear more about what Celeste is like, the tips that Celeste is going to give, and hopefully everyone will know how to structure their pitch. And 5 minutes goes by really fast. So
really fast. And the cool thing about the pitch is, well, first of all, your mentor is going to introduce you, and they're going to give like a 30-second introduction to just like hype you up and tell everyone how awesome you are. But then you're going to give this pitch to the judges, and Celeste is going to teach you about how to do these pitch. But if your pitch is successful, you'll get a callback interview, and you'll be interviewed again later in the day to figure out who's going to win the prizes. And then the 3 big prize winners, best team overall, best overall project, and best overall pitch, are going to be invited to be at part of the FRC Awards Gala on Tuesday night to present live to the entire FIRST community. And that's going to have a massive audience because we're also going to be handing out the Chairman's Awards and Dean's List Awards for the district on Tuesday. So it's really, really big. But that's why we brought a superstar here today. We have Celeste, who's going to teach you how to give a pitch. Right, Celeste?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, let's do this.
Alrighty. So yeah, let's talk about notes on pitching. I just wanted to say right at the beginning that this is not a pitch, because I'm going to be breaking a lot of the rules or a lot of the guidelines I'm going to be talking about, because this is longer than a pitch. Normally a pitch is like 3 to 5 minutes, and it's really concise. And so you can like do a lot more to like control what you're doing in that 3 to 5 minutes. And that's kind of the stuff I'm going to be talking about. But I just wanted to say that this is not a good example of a pitch because that's not what I'm doing. Next slide, please. So who am I? I guess I'm going to start with this because I'm not a pitching expert. I'm a FIRST alumni that has just gone through like some experiences since I graduated, and that's how I've picked up a lot of my pitching skills. And so I wanted to share with you some of the like tips and strategies that I find that can really elevate it. So to give a bit of context, this is kind of where I've learned it from. So I'm an alumni of Team 1360, Orbit Robotics. I was Dean's List finalist in 2017. As Karthik said, I did also, while doing STEM, I was in 3 musical theater productions in high school. And that really had me thinking about acting and performance, which I incorporate that in my pitch. And I feel like that's added to how I pitch. And now I'm a 3rd-year mechanical engineering undergrad at McGill in Montreal. I started out at McGill being involved with student government and student councils. So I also kind of learned of how to pitch myself and pitch my ideas and my mandates through that. And also was involved with like the Quebec Engineering Games, in which I had the chance to do improv, which also I feel like is a really good skill with pitching, is being able to think on your feet and yes and perform. And that was in French, which was even crazier because it's not my first language. And then I've done a few internships that were really interesting. For example, in biophysics at Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto. I was interfacing embedded devices with electric cars at Geotab in Oakville. And last summer I was designing like haptic devices, so how you feel things in VR at a startup in Montreal. And so that was really, really interesting. And last spring, I co-founded with a fellow mechanical engineer at McGill, Acrylic Design and Technology, which is an art tech startup building artwork digitization tools and painting automation to allow independent artists to scale their craft as written. And we've been working on this for the past year, balancing it with school and our like own internships that we were doing last summer. And as Karthik said, we're in the Next 36 accelerator, and we were chosen for this program at the beginning of the year. And we're really excited for the next, we've gone a couple of months in the program, and now there's some more months to do, and it's really going to ramp up and get us all prepped to pitch a lot more for VCs, venture capitalists, which is going to be a lot of pitching. And I'm really learning a lot from this experience because I'm kind of going in blind and doing this all for the first time. And it does feel like a bit like running an FRC team. Next slide, please. So where do we use pitching? I really think we use pitching all the time, and which is why I think it's a super useful skill. So, I mean, if we're speaking directly, chairman's presentations is a pitch, honestly. And talking to pitch judges, that's also a pitch. And networking with sponsors, you're pitching your team and you're pitching why they should partner with you. In extracurriculars, specifically ones that I did that a lot of people do in university, for example, design teams, you're definitely going to have to pitch your car or your underwater autonomous vehicle or whatever you're working on. Case competitions are a big thing. Having a startup kind of just feels like I'm still in a case competition like 12 months later. So you really get to work on your pitching skills when you do case competitions, when you like present your solution. Hackathons, very similar. Like delegations, for like I'm on the Quebec Engineering Games McGill delegation, and in student politics you have to pitch yourself a lot, and also in internships with a lot of you will have to deal with as you go into university, going into job fairs. Every time you approach a recruiter at a booth, you're going to be pitching yourself in 30 seconds. And interviews, it's like a little pitch, even though there's back and forth. Team meetings, as the intern, you do kind of want to prove yourself and prove that you can add value. So performing well at team meetings is advantageous. And so learning how to pitch can help with that. And very similarly, like design reviews are also kind of a pitch. And in school, or specifically for engineering, which I'm in, like project presentations, you're pitching there, and even talking to profs and administration, like if you're asking for an extension on a deadline, or you're trying to get into a class that's full, you're going to have to pitch why you deserve that and why you should get that accommodation. And so you're also using those skills there, even though it doesn't really seem like pitching, using it all the time. So pitching is a performance, but it's definitely something that you can all do. And I'm going to kind of break down some of the like granular details that I've picked up, that it's like a little bit more effort, but it can really elevate your pitch and take it from something looking kind of amateur to something looking really professional with just a couple like side things. And I'm going to be going through a bunch of those here. Next slide. So, okay, the most important part, in my opinion, for a pitch is establishing the desired narrative. So it's like, from what lens do I want the audience to view my story? Because you can have the control to set that in your pitch, and that should be reflected through the slide deck, through the script, through how you answer questions. The narrative should shine through that so that you're able to leave the audience with the impression that you want. Like, how do I want my audience to feel after the pitch? You can establish that, and you need to strategize to be able to convey that properly. Because yeah, the lasting impression is what matters. And also with a narrative, it allows you to set like only one truth that's being shared externally, because we all know in our FRC teams or in our like robot designs that there's always nuance. It's like, oh, this works this way, but has issues with this. And it's just nuance doesn't translate very well when you're in a 3 minute to 5 minute pitch. It's a lot simpler and like gets towards the audience a lot easier when there's one truth. And like one external narrative about what the team is or what you're presenting is, when in reality we all know that our projects and our teams are complex and layered. And it also, having one narrative or one truth, it allows for like cohesiveness between multiple presenters. So for example, when I am doing a pitch with my co-founder Chloe, and then we get to the question period, and either of us is going to have to pick up questions, kind of like when judges ask questions in chairman's. We want to make sure that we're both pursuing the same narrative, that we're both doing the same storyline, even though like it's all truth and it's all the like the team and what it is. But though like it's important to choose ahead of time what you want to be saying, because if not, it can really confuse your audience because they don't have the context to understand the nuances about your team or your project that you do. Next slide. Okay, so you want to tether your storyline. And this like very important part of the narrative is you want to be telling a story. You're not just dumping information. You're not just showing something. There's a reason that you're talking about that, and that's your story. So what I tend to use is like you like tether your pitch to an empathetic story and something that even as you're presenting information, you can always tie it back to the original storyline. So for example, that could be like a personal experience. Like I have a friend who's a founder of a new age toothbrush, and how she pitches, she talks about her experience going to the dentist and finding out she has cavities and learning from her dentist that most people actually brush their teeth incorrectly. And was the inspiration for her startup. But like, that's kind of the story that's like the intro, and that familiarizes and conceptual, like really makes it tangible for your audience what you're talking about. Also, like a commonly experienced incident can be the storyline that you're tethering your proposition to, your pitch to. Like there's a startup, Cheaper Eats, in the Montreal community, and their pitch is awesome because they walk you through going into a restaurant, you're eating your meal, you have to pay, and then you're like, you don't want to have to wait for the bill to come to you, and then you sign it, and then it goes back, and then you're free to go. It's not a frictionless process. And you're able to feel as the audience how you're right, that is not a frictionless process, because they walk you through an experience that a lot of us have gone through and can personally tie in our head what it means. And it allows them to convey the information of their pitch in a way that really relates more to the audience, and that like makes sense because of their pre-existing experiences. Or one that we use with acrylic is the story of imaginary archetypal characters. This one it's like you still get to establish an empathetic storyline because by like establishing names and backgrounds of your characters, and it makes it people first. It's like a people first approach, and how your proposal or your pitch can help someone. And so if you're not talking about a personal experience, you're not talking about a commonly experienced incident, then you're able to relate it to these archetypal characters. So at Acrylic, we use Ella and Simon. Ella is the independent artist, and Simon is a art buyer on a budget. And we talk about our value proposition from their perspectives and how we can help them, even though Ella and Simon are just imaginary and they're just vehicles for us to talk about our value proposition. Next slide, please. So embedding required info into your storyline. This is part of like not dumping your info and having it all look like it's part of the same cohesive story that you're presenting. So you don't really want stuff that looks out of place. It should, and that's kind of like how you structure the order of your slides and the information you're presenting to make it smooth. And I guess some really like granular things that I found that can help is when you're dealing with boring information that you need to present, you can stick with the user perspective and present it from the user perspective, because it makes it more like relatable or accessible for the audience to understand. So for example, talking about the competitive landscape for why your proposition, how your proposition compares to existing things on the market or existing solutions to your problem. It's saying the pros and cons from the user perspective, relating it to how this will be used and how this will impact people. And for example, if you're going through a financial model of your proposition or of your solution, you can walk through an early adopter's typical transaction, so that it's like it makes sense to the audience, and it's not just kind of like numbers, and it's not abstract. It's really tangible to a person-first experience. Next slide, please. Cohesive visual telling, big thing. I mean, I have black text on white slides, which is, I guess, cohesive, but you would want to have this a lot more branded on your pitch. And the brand and the visuals really set the narrative for visual learners, because someone might not really remember any of what you said during your pitch, but they might remember how your slides looked. And I have a lot of times where I remember how the slides look, but I don't really remember the voice of the presenter or the words they were saying. So the colors and shapes you use really reflect the emotions that the story projects. So like, I mean, I guess an example is if you were doing like a mental health or meditation app, maybe you wouldn't use red as your brand color, because it's not a color that's like calming or reflective. It's just red gives a very different emotional response than blue or indigo could, and that does contribute to how your story comes across towards your audience. And also like using visual proofs to support your claims and enrich your story. So I guess if you're doing a presentation about like the outreach events your team's done, you would want photos from those events. And even if you're not pointing out the photos during your speaking, just having them up there is like visual like proof and visual like support towards what you're saying. Or for example, like for a startup, it might be like you have a visual proof of like a prototype you might have done. And even if you don't talk about the prototype, just having a photo of it on the screen indicates that this is being like worked through and the technical viability is being assessed. And this is very granular, but it does actually make a difference. Having brand continuity through inconsistent visuals. So the visuals that we use on our acrylic pitch to talk about Ella and Simon are kind of just like open source graphics that we found of human characters, but we wanted to maintain like a consistent narrative and like have a consistent story, even though we're using all these different graphics. So we like made all of the Ellas have purple hair. And so that's how all of the small like girl characters became Ella, is because they all have purple hair. Or for Simon, they all have a blue beard. And that's how we're able to take all of these like similar looking graphics and have them part of the same story. And I mean, this is really quick, but like if you're using graphs and stuff, you can still have that be on brand with your color scheme. And you don't even need to go and fix your color scheme directly in Excel or wherever you're making your graphs. On Google Drive, you can literally just like tint the asset, and you can change the color of the graph and make it match more with your branding. And it's super fast, but it makes a difference for like continuity. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide. Okay, so your whole pitch is leading up to your ask, your call to action, or your desired takeaway. The story should naturally convince the audience of the desired takeaway even before you reach it, just because of the story is like convincing of your narrative. The narrative is kind of like the context which leads to the takeaway. And yeah, the reason is already being narrated, I said on the slide. And it's like the ask, how it should be positioned in your storyline. It's like it's like, oh, we did this, and then this allows us to bring this value to this set of people, and this is how we're doing it so far. This is what we're working on. And it's like, it's the missing piece in the story that you've built is the ask, which is how the audience is a part of your story now, because you're reaching out to them and you're saying, oh, we need $15,000 or whatever you're asking for, or we would love to win the chairman's award. Whatever it is, it's like that's part of it's part of your story, and it's like it naturally brings the audience into playing a part and helping you complete the story through, and that makes them want to do your ask, or make them want to internalize the takeaway, even if it's just informative. Next slide, please. All right, write a script. I used to not want to write a script and think that I was totally fine and I could do improv and I was fine on my feet. And that might have been the case when I was like peaking at my social interaction in like, honestly, 2017, when I was doing when I was doing Dean's List, because I had my whole portfolio in my head and I knew how to answer the questions and bring an example in and tie it all together. Now I don't talk to other people. I'm in quarantine and I pitch, and I even struggle just to answer questions after a pitch. So I really do recommend writing a script, because maybe you think that like you can be fine on your feet, but maybe you're having a bad day, maybe you're tired that day, and you don't want that to be reflected in the words and the enthusiasm that you use, when you can set that ahead of time in your script. So, I mean, yeah, it ensures you're using the right words. I'm very particular about the words that we use to represent acrylic, because it shapes the external narrative that we're doing. Yeah, the narrative to be communicated, you can really establish that and make sure it's communicated by writing a script and reading it over and getting it proofread and being like, does this tell the story that I want? Does this communicate the truth that I am sharing externally? And it ensures the flow between the different slides and between different presenters. It can be hard to like hand off presenting when you're doing it with other people in front of other people, but when it's set in the slides, it's perfect. And it locks in your confident wording ahead of the presentation, which kind of goes with what I was saying earlier, where you might not be feeling it when you're actually presenting it, but that shouldn't change the narrative and that shouldn't change the energy that you've chosen. And so you can lock that in by just using those energetic words or using the words that are in line with your narrative in your script. And so you're going to get that across because it's in the script. And a big thing is it helps you test and maintain time restraints. Yeah, time restraints. All the time, we write a script and it's a minute over like a 3-minute pitch, which is a lot of cutting we need to do to get the excess content out. And it's a lot easier to do that when you have a script and you can test it and time it and go again, test it, time it, go again, than just hoping that you're going to be within the 3 minutes, because more than once I've been in situations where they cut you off at 3 minutes, which is really not a good experience. And it doesn't allow you to end your story as you want. It doesn't allow you to get to your takeaway and complete the story with the audience. It's not a great way to perform. And this is in like in class and schools, they cut you off, which is unfortunate. And also when you're like pitching your startup, for example, they cut you off. So it is pretty common. So a script can really fix all these problems, even though I'm like, I don't need to do a script, but it really ensures quality in your presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, iterate your slides. This is, I mean, kind of a no-brainer, but I like, sometimes I do the slides first and then I make the script. Sometimes I write a script, I write my story, and then I make slides to match. Either approach is fine, but once you have both, once you have drafts of both, you're going to want to be going between them and iterating, because you want to avoid irrelevant visuals. I used to sometimes just add photos of stuff that was like kind of related to give context. That doesn't fly. I wouldn't do that now. or you can't get away with it as easily now because all the visuals should directly contribute to your narrative and directly contribute to getting your audience on board with your ask. And getting rid of redundant text is also a big thing. Like there shouldn't really be full sentences unless it's the only sentence on the slide. Also, you'll see if you're saying exactly what's on the slide in your script, then you don't need it on the slide. You can say it in the script. And there is something to be said with if you have too much text on your visuals, then people are going to be reading the text on your visuals and not listening to you. And the text is up to interpretation from the audience. But what you're saying and how you say it, you have a lot more control about with how it's interpreted by the audience when it's actually coming out of your mouth instead of someone reading the text in their head. And yeah, less text is better than more. That's like always true in my opinion. And you can also like break up your slides to have larger words or larger sentences to have more of an impact, and get larger visuals. Like if you're squeezing multiple photos in and trying to get them as big as possible to fit around the words, like I have been there, it's time to just take the actual important visuals and give them their own slide. And maybe you flip slides halfway through the like paragraph or what you're saying, or even you duplicate the slide and then you have your large visual between the duplicates. So it just looks like you're talking about the things in your slide and then you're showing the large visual that you want, and then you're back on the same slide, even though it's just like a duplicate. And it's just good for continuity. And allows you to kind of talk about a large visual in the middle of a slide instead of having to have that at the end of your slide. You know, maybe that's not the storyline that you want to go over in that specific slide. Let info breathe so the important parts sink in. Yeah, I kind of talked a bit about that before, like having like one big sentence on a slide or like one big factoid on a slide allows it to breathe and have it more impact on your audience. And consistent branding, I guess that's another, just like as you're iterating your slides and really cleaning it up, you're going to want to look for when your fonts are inconsistent, it's not good. If your sizing is inconsistent, it's not good. If your what do you call it? Your indent is slightly larger on some slides and slightly larger and smaller on other slides, you're going to see that when you click through. And it's like, although this is little details and I wouldn't sweat it because it is the 20% of the year and you want to put more of your effort in your 80%. If you are like really finessing this and really trying to make it perfect, those things can make a difference, even just subconsciously for your audience to see the consistent branding. Next slide, please. All right, pitch delivery, last and the most important in my opinion. I'd say definitely practice, because you don't want to go up there and do your pitch and be like, oh, that wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, because that was avoidable if you practiced it and realize that, oh, I don't like the way that this sentence comes out, or I don't like the way that we present this slide. This slide might look weak in our narrative. And you're able to figure that all out when you practice more than once, especially with your presenters. Don't rush. Always take your time. And when you're nervous, you're going to naturally speak faster. I probably have been speaking way too fast this whole presentation. But sometimes I'm doing a 3-minute pitch and the script barely fits in 3 minutes. So I will talk very quickly to get through it. Is it the best approach? No, but sometimes you need to, because the script is all together and you're crunched on time before when you have to present. Sometimes that happens. And sometimes I'm just like, okay, I'm going to make this script work, but I'm going to have to speak very quickly to get through it. And that's just part of it. And practicing that can help. Okay, this is very technical, but I actually think it makes a difference. Using your chest voice instead of your head voice. So especially female identifying folk, a lot of our voice is coming out of our head, and that's where the sound is vibrating. This is a bit of like theater technique. And because a lot of our vocal range is in our head, and it means that the sound that we're doing is a lot more constricted. It's a lot more nasally. It's not as loud. So I'm trying to like put a lot of my voice back up in my head to give an example. While if you're actually transition your voice to be a lot more in your chest and it's vibrating in your chest cavity, there's a lot more support to your voice. And also just like, especially in male dominant spaces, they're all speaking with their chest voice. It just comes out a lot louder and a lot more confident, honestly. And being able to, I guess, use your chest and use your volume, even if you're staying at the same like loudness, but it's just a fuller sound. It can deliver differently when you're pitching. It can make you feel a lot more confident, take up a lot more space in the room, which you want to be doing. You do not want to be minimizing the space you're taking in the room, just by changing that. And I guess like specifically, if you all want to try this right now for fun, is like switching your breathing from, instead of, you don't want your shoulders going up and down because that's all tight and it's all up in your neck, which is not where you want your voice to be. But stomach breathing, where your stomach comes out, allows your voice to go a lot more into your chest, and allows it allows it to like vibrate in this much larger acoustic cavity. Stand, that's another thing. I actually don't have a standing setup in my apartment right now, which is unfortunate, and I'm pitching looking down, which also isn't great. But some of the best pitchers I've seen in COVID times are people that do it on Zoom while standing up. It's just way more dynamic. You've got a lot more energy, and it does help how your acoustics are vibrating when you're speaking. It's a lot easier to get it into your chest when you're standing. Okay, engage and report, and don't read. Even when you're following a script and you're reading a script, you're gonna want to make these sentences dynamic, and it's like you're reporting kind of a bit like a news anchor and engaging with the audience, even if you can't see them. Like I can't see any of you. So some of the things that I've found to help make it more natural is some hand movements, a bit, not too much. It can just give a bit of, especially when we're just a little square on a screen, having a bit of movement can draw eyes towards your screen and make it a bit more engaging. Eyebrow raises, head tilts, you like lean your chest or stuff like that. That can all just give it a bit more dynamic feel. Smile, I mean, that one's really obvious, but also I fail to do it when I'm presenting. And it really can help, and especially if you're answering a question you're not sure about, it's like can give you a bit of space to kind of figure out what you want to say. And move your eyes. I sometimes I struggle with maintaining eye contact when I'm having a conversation with someone sometimes, because I'm thinking about how many times I need to blink, like, but luckily on Zoom, it's a bit less direct, but also it can be weird to be staring into a camera the whole time. So I actually look around when I pitch, and I don't know if that actually makes it a better pitch or if it makes it more distracting for the audience, because I'm not always looking at the camera. But for me, at least, it gives me a bit of space to breathe, of just kind of what I'm looking at and what I'm thinking at when I'm not always looking at the screen, or I'm not always looking at the camera. Like just looking to the side for a sec can give my brain a bit of time for the wheels to turn, for me to figure out what I'm about to do next. For example, when I'm like answering questions, which I have to think on my feet about, I can give you a bit of a breath, a bit of a moment. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so I mean, if you didn't hear any of that, the most important thing is that you've got this, and that you all have the power to pitch well. And it's just about experimenting, iterating, seeing what takes, and getting feedback after your pitch is actually really important. It can be embarrassing to ask for, how did we do after you present? And like, you don't want to get roasted, but honestly, getting feedback is the easiest way to make your pitch better over time, because you're going to be doing a lot of pitches, and some of them are not going to be good. Some of them are going to be better. And you just want to be collecting that data so that you can get better over time. And it can take years. Don't stress about it. You're going to have lots of opportunities to use this to its full potential. Yeah.
Thank you, Celeste. Okay, that was amazing. There was a lot of information. I was like taking notes through it, and so I have like things I want to talk about here. And I think it's really important. So number one, we actually have a lot of people with theater and vocal backgrounds who are participating in the STEMathon today. So I think it was really cool that you showed that your background in those areas are so beneficial for what you do. And I remember when you became a game announcer for First Canada, that was one of the things that, you know, when I was talking to you about doing this job, I was like, oh yeah, you're a singer in theater and you're good in front of crowds. But I love just the breathing talk. These are things that can be used in so many different ways, right, Celeste?
Yeah, and it feels really weird to be rethinking about how I'm breathing, but it actually, like I'm like doing it right now. It can really make a difference for how your sound comes out and also just how your body looks and how it's structured. This, I guess I didn't talk about this in my pitch, but what I really found useful is thinking about this bone right here, and I want to turn it up. It's not about like moving your shoulders back. It's just turning this bone upwards, which puts your shoulders back and sets you all up and gets your neck on top of your spine and gets all the voice going where you want it to go. I know that's very granular, but I do find it is helpful.
It is helpful. It's the same old trick, like, you know, use your diaphragm, not your throat, you know, like project, project, project. You talked about
Mhm.
how details matter. And I think this is one that a lot of people miss because a lot of people are like, you know, it's like, oh, I don't need to line this up. You know, they don't think that way. And no one's going to look at your pitch and be like, oh, it's not lined up, I'm not going to give them the money. But it subconsciously has an effect. Like when you have random font size changes, or,
Mm.
you know, like everything's organized, but one thing isn't, or, you know, one bullet point off. Those little details truly do matter. And you obviously have to get the big details solved first, but the little ones matter. So I thought there was a neat connection between your presentation and Lisa's presentation. Lisa's
Yeah.
presentation, you know, a lot of it was focused on answering the question, what's the problem we're trying to solve? You know, and when you're designing something, it's easy to lose track. And when teams are working on their projects this week, it's going to be this weekend, you know, you have to go back to what's the problem we're trying to solve. And I think with giving a pitch, it's what's the narrative we're trying to send. And that's the strategic design of the pitch, right? It's like you have to identify the narrative that you're trying to get across and make sure everything is supporting that narrative.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
For
And like,
sure.
but to me, it's just like that comes back to building a robot, because when you're building a robot, for those of you who are involved in first, you're trying to answer the question, how are we going to win the most matches, or how are we going to win the turn? And it comes back to that. And so like having this singular point, like to me, like that was so insightful, Celeste, because I hadn't thought of it like that, but it makes so much sense.
Yeah, and like you just totally reminded me of 2017. We had a low ball output and spent all this effort and all this like metal and volume in our robot on an indexing system of balls to go into the low goal, which we used 0 times in competition. So it just like wasn't good it wasn't good like commitment to the narrative and commitment to the actual problem, I guess, which is get the most points as possible in the field. Yeah, and I like that's a great link to R&D because, or to brainstorming, because it's very easy to get like distracted by opportunities of cool things to design or cool problems to solve, but it's not necessarily the problem that we're trying to solve and that actually gets us points, or that actually gets us the next meeting if we're thinking about this in pitching.
So a question I have for you, Celeste, when you're giving a pitch, do you try and do research on your audience to kind of tailor things to their skill set?
I should, and that is the best way to do it. I actually like, I mean, I'm gonna admit that I lack at that, and sometimes I just go in without knowing, and it's bad, and it always doesn't go well because the people ask a question and I'm not sure in what lens to use when I answer it, because I don't know the pre-existing perspective that they have coming in to see my content and see the narrative that I'm doing, and being able to cater your answers to what people know. And you can find out all that online. You can search up who you're going to be presenting in front of. It's just like it's also part of showing you did your homework, which people really appreciate. Yeah, yeah, I agree.
I think there's a valuable skill here. And like perhaps we talked about this when you were getting ready for one of your scholarship interviews, It's about, so if you don't know who it is and you're going in, without that advanced knowledge, it's reading the room. And this is a really hard skill to develop. You have to do it really quickly because you don't have much time. But reading the room based on other cues that you have to try and figure out. And as you're pitching, watch their eyes, see what they're interested in, and then know where to focus on. It's like, oh, I've caught someone's attention here, and it's like, I now have to reel that person in. And so reading the room is a super valuable skill because, when you understand your audience, like one of the big things is, Celeste, you talked about, telling the story and walking it through. And when you walk someone through a story, there's two different paths you can take. You can take an emotional path or you can take a numerical path. And different people respond to those things very differently. But some people who like the numerical path do not want to hear the emotional path. And some people who like the emotional path have no interest in the numerical path. But if you can figure that out, oh, you are set. So
yeah. I just like you said, I sometimes I see on Zoom when people react or when they move when a particular slide is up, and I'm like, okay, interesting. I have to figure out why that slide triggered that reaction. And also if it's a good reaction or a bad reaction, like also gives me information about what I need to change or what I need to emphasize more. And also, I guess, like sometimes the questions you get at the end of your pitch can be very indicative of where your pitch needs work. Because if they're asking questions and you're like, why don't you understand that? It's because you didn't do a good job at communicating it. So, and it's always not the audience's fault when they don't get it. It's the presenter's fault for not communicating it or catering it for their lens.
That's fabulous. Celeste, we do have to go because everyone's super excited about the theme, but this was a fabulous presentation. All right, thank you, Celeste, for that fabulous presentation. That was every time I watch it, I'm like, first off, how is she so smart? She just knows everything, and it's just so good at like a young age, to have mastered this sort of skill that to people like. That's the kind of presentation that people in industry pay thousands of dollars to hear because they're so, so valuable. And folks, I really hope you were watching that and were taking some notes or are going to rewatch because it's linked in the handbook to kind of see what you're going to do. But it's going to be so important as you get part of your pitching process. Emily, do you have any takeaways from that presentation?
Oh, it's one of my favorite presentations to watch every year. I think we've had it for every single year at the STEMathon now, and it's just really it's really helpful to like when it comes to how to pitch to your audience properly, and because pitching is really important. It was a really important part about this whole presentation. We have an award for best pitch. Like pitching is something you should not forget about. So it's just a super useful video.
And you do it all the time in your life.
Exactly.
Every job interview you're going to have is a pitch. Every scholarship interview, every Dean's List interview, impact award, anything, talking to the judges in the pits, that's a pitch. And so like there was two things that really stood out to me. One was about how little details matter. And then the piece on cohesive visual storytelling, because I think we miss these things sometimes where it's like, oh, it's okay to be sloppy. No one's even going to notice. No one's going to even notice. People notice. They might not even realize they notice, but they notice. And so really, really important there. All right, folks, I know you want to know the theme, and we're going to tell you the theme in just a second, but we'll be back in a moment. Okay, folks, it is time. Are you ready for this, Emily?
I am so excited. This theme I'm just so excited for people to hear about it. I think people will come up with so many amazing ideas. It's so exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited to tell them that it's a water game. It's not. But hey, that's coming up this season. That's coming up this season for FRC and FTC and FLL. All right, folks, you've waited long enough. It's now time to unveil the theme for this year's First Canada STEMathon. Girls and Allies, let's do it. All right, folks, there it is. AI Odyssey, transforming our culture for a brighter future. Simply put, folks, we're tasking you to make the world a better place using artificial intelligence. The world faces some really big problems right now. I think we all know that. But artificial intelligence is poised to help us solve them. But folks, it's not simple because it's not just about coming up with a solution. There are complex ethical challenges that artificial intelligence solutions are facing right now. So to solve these problems using AI, you have to address these challenges. And that can only be done by problem solvers who have a focus on empathy, equity, diversity, inclusion, and gracious professionalism. And that's why FIRST is tied into all of this. So think about how we could use artificial intelligence to fight climate change, to address inequity, to help make our world more accessible for all, provide better access to healthcare, build more housing. There's no shortage of big problems out there, folks. And it's your job to try and come up with an artificial intelligence-based solution to help make our world a better place and our futures brighter. And you have to think about the impact of that as well. We talked a little bit earlier about, whoa, artificial intelligence, like this requires a lot of energy and water. So are you offsetting these sorts of things? And these are the things that you'll need to think about. So Emily, what's your thought when you hear this theme?
Oh, this theme, it's the nice thing about this theme is very current. AI is something that's happening. We hear things in the news every day about this, and it's something that we're learning more and more about it because there's still so much we haven't discovered with it. There's still more we can do with it, which is why I think this theme's great because you can help us figure out what we can do with it. And
Well,
really,
yeah,
Yeah.
we're at the precipice here, folks. Our
yeah.
world is changing. This is a new piece of technology. This could be like the Industrial Revolution, where it's a total change in how things are done. And so you get to be a part of it. And folks, what you come up with here in the STEMathon today could be something that you turn into an invention or you turn into a company. Like the future is there. And like this is like not one where we're saying, hey, reinvent the wheel. We need a wheel, folks. And you're starting right there in that spot. So to help us understand some of the challenges we're facing with artificial intelligence and how it connects to both our past and future, please welcome the Associate Professor in the Strategic Management area at the Joseph L. Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto, and someone who has studied how artificial intelligence can be used alongside human workers, Dr. Kevin Bryan.
Hello, welcome. I'm Kevin Bryan from the University of Toronto. I'm excited to welcome you to the first Robotics AI Odyssey competition. You know, the thing with artificial intelligence is something that it shares with a lot of other great technologies in history, in that it's not the initial technology that matters, it's the development done by people like you to take those early ideas, those scientific breakthroughs, and create something that really matters for the world. So let's step way back into the 1800s. Let's look at a couple of other technologies that were similarly influential, had great potential, but took a long time for that potential to be realized because of all the work that needed to be done to bring these ideas to their utmost success. So let's start with the airplane. You know, man's been trying to fly. If you look in books going back over 1,000 years, people discuss this. Da Vinci wrote about ideas on how we could fly. The Montgolfier brothers, late 1700s, got their hot air balloon into the world and showed it was possible to fly. But that still left a question of, can I go fast? Can I control things? Can I fly a person in something heavier than air rather than just relying on helium? And many people had ideas on this. In the middle of the 1800s, we'd actually already seen demonstrations of little models of steam-powered airplanes flying across a room. We'd figured out how to build hang gliders in the era of Otto Lilienthal in Germany in the late 1800s. We'd already had the internal combustion engine from the 1860s. So we had many of the components of the airplane at the time that the Wright brothers, on the beaches of Kitty Hawk in 1903, finally cracked the puzzle of how do I control this thing flying through the air. You know, the problem was Getting enough power to get in the air, people knew how to do that. Keeping it controlled in the air was tougher because air, like water, is turbulent. You can imagine if you could blow some smoke into the air, you would see waves, especially when someone runs by or a train passes by you as you feel that wind hit your face. And so trying to control a plane in the air is actually not that different from controlling a kayak in the water or controlling a bicycle on a road. So it's not that surprising that the Wright brothers, who owned a bicycle shop, were the ones who figured out, the tricky part of getting an airplane up is not just having enough power, is not just having the right metal or material. The tricky part is going to be, how do I control things? And because they had their own bicycle shop, they figured, well, just like with a bicycle, I make all these little tiny adjustments to get the bicycle to go where I want it to go. With an airplane and its wings, if I'm trying to even out as I hit turbulence, what I need to do is change the shape of those wings in order to react to the turbulent air. And so what they did was they built these wings out of fabric with ropes attached to each side. And as they pulled the ropes sitting in the middle of the plane, they could bend one side or the other of the airplane and keep it under control. First time, 29 seconds in the end of 1903. But even that wasn't enough. Though they eventually were able to, by 1907, 1908, take their plane in figure eights across the sky. Though they were able to stay up for an hour or even longer, and though many people were building on their inventions, so instead of just using ropes to control the wings, a number of French designers decided to use ailerons, or a little metal flap, the kind you see on an airplane today on the wing. Look next time as you're landing or taking off, you'll see this little metal flap pop up on the side of the wing. That's to control the plane. We continue to make all of these small advances. We get to 1910, and you're still seeing articles in newspapers, in magazines, along the lines of, are we ever going to have a use for airplanes? Can they do anything other than surveil from the sky? Well, we get into World War I, and of course the military uses become clear. After World War I, we start monitoring our farms and dropping pesticides. We start thinking about, how can I map new lands? We start delivering mail. Antoine Saint-Exupéry, who wrote The Little Prince, actually was a mail delivery man by air. And so by the 1920s, we finally have a useful airplane. And remember, many of the important scientific breakthroughs have been figured out in 1860. It just takes a long time for all the applications, all the ideas on how I use this new technology to come to light. The same's true of electricity. It's hard to imagine a world when we don't have power. But our friend Thomas Edison, 1882 in New York City, starts delivering power to buildings for the first time through a central power plant. Interestingly enough, actually, Edison has a nice connection to Canada. His father, Samuel Edison, was one of the leaders of the 1837 rebellion that attempted to bring democracy to Ontario. It didn't succeed then. They actually kicked him out of the country. He had to move to Ohio. Well, in any case, Thomas Edison figured out, I've got a light bulb. Literally, not figuratively, literally a light bulb. If I'm going to put this in people's houses and people's factories, I need to build a whole system around it. That was the power plant and the power wires connecting to the factories. And that's in 1882. We've already got this. And it's kind of self-evident that this is useful. You can turn on the light switch and light up midnight. But in fact, electricity was not used by most households or most factories for quite some time. It's into the 1920s before we see half of all American factories electrified. Well, why did it take so long? So at first, people see electricity and they think, well, I'm already getting power from my factory. From what? From a water wheel. Or from steam, a steam engine. And so how does that work? Well, I attach a bunch of belts to a turbine. The turbine spins from the water or the steam. The belts run up and down through the factory, connecting to a bunch of machines. They spin up to the 6th floor and then back down to the steam engine. These belts and the engine itself, very heavy. We have to build this thick, tall ceilinged factory. Think of like the lofts in the garment district of New York or in downtown Toronto. So I get electricity. That helps a little bit. I can save money from running these belts. But I'm just comparing saving a bit of money on power to what I was doing before. The real trick with electricity is that it lets you do brand new things. So if I don't need to be near a heavy steam engine, or I don't need to be near a water source, I can open my factory wherever I want. I can open it in the suburbs or in the countryside where land is cheaper. And since I don't need this belt going up to the 6th floor and down, I can turn my factory sideways and just plug in each machine along the wall wherever I need power. And once I've done that, then I can create an assembly line and really speed up productivity. And so all these inventions that followed what Thomas Edison did are really what mattered. And this turns out to be true of any technology you want. It's not just airplanes or electricity. It's true of tractors. It's true of computers. And it will be true of AI as well. We still have decades of work to do to figure out how we should use AI, what the best use cases are, and what the things AI will let us do that we just can't do in any other way today. And you're going to play a role in making that happen. So this is the first step. You don't have much time. I'm sure you've got lots of ideas. I'm going to let you go and get started. And I look forward to hearing about the breakthroughs you made. Good luck.
Hey, let's try this again. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Oh, I thought it was me this time. Okay. That's why I went off.
It was going to be one of us, right? It was going to be one of us. I
exactly.
double muted. I double muted
Okay.
right there. So I unmuted one and then didn't unmute the other. Hey, Dr. Brian is absolutely fascinating. So that was really insightful. Thank you so much for that. If you want to learn more about Dr. Brian's research, go check him out on the U of T website. It's so many interesting things, not just AI related. Fascinating. It's really, really cool. Okay, Emily, we're going to just get started with this event. We'll be back in just a couple seconds, folks. All right, folks. So here's what's happening now. You know what the theme is, and it's time to get started. So you're going to start your brainstorming process. You're going to go through the handbook to kind of look at, like what did Lisa talk about the brainstorming process? You need to know the problem you're trying to solve. And the problem you're trying to solve here is, with the theme, but you're also trying to win. And how do you win? You need to look at the judges' rubrics and you need to look at the skills that are, that they're asking for. What are you supposed to deliver? What are your deliverables going to be? So it's time to go through all of that. If you need help, Emily, how can they get help?
If you need help, we have channels in Slack. We have help pitch and help project. And if you ask any questions there, all the mentors have access to that. If you have any mentor specific ones, you're welcome to add any mentors that you need help with. All their mentor bios are in the handbook as well. So if there's any specific help you need, you can take a look at there and you see which mentors have expertise in certain things. And yeah.
Yeah, and like that's really cool because we have a very diverse group of mentors with a lot of different skills. And so, and remember, folks, well, you might not know this yet, but when you go through the handbook, you look at the rubrics, all teams are required to consult with at least one mentor who's not on their team to be eligible for the awards or whatever. So you do need to reach out to the other mentors. And so your mentor can help make those connections. We have roving mentors who are in all the channels who will help make those connections, but you really want to do that. And also this is a great time to network, a great time to learn, and so we're out. Emily and I are both available all weekend. So if you want our help, I have lots of thoughts on this theme and AI and these projects, and be happy to help along with the others. Really important things to remember, folks. All your materials are due tomorrow at 7:30. That means your infographic especially, but if you are doing slides or such and you want the judges to have access to them, you have to put it there. Code snippets, anything you want to show the judges, you need to submit before 7:30 a.m. You can still work on, well, you can't work on the infographic. You can still work on your slides after 7:30, but at least the judges will have the 7:30 copy. Judges will start at 8 Judging will start at 8:30 a.m. tomorrow. That is very, very early. And it'll go until about noon, at least the first round of judging. Then at noon, we're going to start our activities, which include the scavenger hunt for prizes and the escape rooms. And then we'll be doing judging callback interviews at 1 o'clock, where the top teams will have a chance to interview with a different set of judges. Same presentation and all. And then we'll come back here tomorrow at 3 p.m. for our closing ceremony, where we're going to find out who all the award winners are going to be. So it's going to be a great time. Emily, any final words?
My final words, have fun and good luck, everyone. It's gonna be an
It's going to
awesome
be
event.
fabulous. All right. See you tomorrow. See you in Slack, actually. Bye, folks.